Have you ever felt like life is pressing down on you, like every step forward is met with 2 steps back? Maybe you've been facing sleepless nights, broken dreams, or moments where it feels like the wilderness stretches endlessly before you. If that resonates with you, know this: you're not alone. These struggles, though painful, are not the end of your story. They're part of something greater, something divine. In today's video, we'll explore how challenges are not obstacles meant to break you, but tools designed to shape and prepare you for the incredible plans God has for your life. We'll look at some powerful biblical stories that show how even the toughest trials have a purpose. Together, we'll uncover how faith, trust in God's timing, and perseverance lead to the blessings waiting on the other side of the storm. Stay with me, because by the end of this video, you'll not only understand why struggles are part of the process, but you'll also feel renewed strength to face whatever lies ahead. Let's dive in. Let's begin with a truth that may be difficult to hear, but is essential to embrace. Struggles are part of the journey. They are not meant to destroy you, but to develop you. Think about Joseph, a young man who had every reason to believe his life was over when his brothers threw him into a pit. He went from being his father's favored son to a slave in Egypt, and then later to a prisoner. From the outside, it looked like Joseph's story was one of despair and abandonment. But here's the remarkable thing. What Joseph didn't know in those moments of pain was that God was orchestrating something far greater than he could imagine. Every betrayal, every lonely night in that prison cell, every unjust accusation was positioning him for a purpose so much bigger than himself. Eventually, Joseph rose to power, becoming second only to Pharaoh, and used that position to save countless lives, including the very family that had betrayed him. Genesis 50 verse 20 captures this transformation beautifully. What the enemy meant for harm, God intended for good. Let that sink in for a moment. The pit wasn't the end, it was the beginning. The prison wasn't a punishment, it was preparation. Now let's pause and think about your life. Maybe you're facing your own version of the pit, a financial struggle, a broken relationship, or a season where nothing seems to go right. It's easy to feel abandoned in these moments, but remember, just like Joseph, you're being prepared. These struggles are the birthing pains of something greater. This idea isn't limited to Joseph's story. Consider the Israelites wandering through the wilderness for 40 years. It's easy to think of this as wasted time, but God had a purpose for their journey. The wilderness wasn't a detour, it was a training ground. It was in the wilderness that they learned dependence on God, witnessing His provision daily through manna from heaven and water from a rock. And isn't that the way God works? He doesn't waste pain or time. Romans 8 verse 28 reminds us that all things work together for good for those who love God. That doesn't mean the journey will be easy, but it does mean it will be worth it. When you're in the middle of your own wilderness season, it's tempting to question God's timing. You might think, why is this taking so long? Or why is everyone else moving forward while I feel stuck? But waiting is not denial, it's preparation. Just like a farmer plants seeds and waits for the harvest, your season of waiting is a time for growth beneath the surface, even if you can't see it yet. Let's take Abraham and Sarah as an example. God promised them a child, but years passed without any sign of fulfillment. They waited and waited so long, in fact, that they began to doubt. Yet, in His perfect timing, God gave them Isaac, the child of promise. Their story teaches us that delays are not denials. When you're tempted to give up, remember that God's timing is always perfect. Isaiah 40 verse 31 reminds us, "Those who wait on the Lord shall renew their strength." Waiting might feel like weakness, but it's where God renews and strengthens you for what's to come. So, how do we keep going when the waiting feels unbearable? The key lies in faith. Faith isn't just believing that God exists, it's trusting that He is actively working in your life, even when you can't see it. One of the most powerful examples of this is the woman with the issue of blood. For 12 long years, she suffered, spending all her money on treatments that failed her. Yet, she didn't let her circumstances dictate her faith. She pressed through the crowd, touched the hem of Jesus' garment, and was healed instantly. Her faith moved mountains, literally. Jesus turned to her and said, "Your faith has made you well." What an incredible reminder that faith, even the size of a mustard seed, has the power to change everything. And here's the truth. Your faith doesn't have to be perfect. It just has to be persistent. Maybe you feel like you're hanging on by a thread right now, but that thread is enough. Keep praying, keep trusting, and keep taking steps forward, no matter how small they may seem. As we move forward, we'll explore how God uses these moments of struggle and waiting to prepare us for the blessings He's promised. Because make no mistake, your promised land is closer than you think. Let's take a closer look at what it means to go through a season of divine preparation. Often, when we're in the middle of a struggle, it feels like punishment. The wilderness seems endless, the challenges seem insurmountable, and we begin to question whether God has forgotten us. But here's the truth. The wilderness is not a punishment, it's a training ground. Think back to the Israelites again. Before they could enter the promised land, they had to learn to trust God completely. They had been enslaved in Egypt for generations, and while God had freed them physically, their hearts and minds still carried the chains of slavery. The wilderness was where God broke those chains and prepared them to step into their new identity as His chosen people. Imagine what would have happened if they'd entered the promised land without this preparation. They wouldn't have known how to rely on God, how to fight battles, or how to steward the blessings they were about to receive. God used their time in the wilderness to build their faith, teach them obedience, and mold them into a nation ready to take hold of His promises. And that's exactly what God is doing in your life right now. The challenges you face, the delays you endure, and the struggles that seem to stretch on forever, they're not signs that God has abandoned you. They're evidence that He's preparing you for something greater than you can imagine. Consider David, another example of God's divine preparation. Before he became king, David spent years in obscurity, tending sheep and later running for his life from King Saul. From a worldly perspective, it looked like David's life was going nowhere. But during those years in the wilderness, David learned to trust God deeply. He wrote some of the most heartfelt psalms during those times, pouring out his fears, frustrations, and faith. When the time came for David to step into his role as king, he was ready, not because of his own strength, but because of the strength God had developed in him during his trials. Here's the key. God uses the wilderness to refine you, not to punish you. Think of gold being purified in fire. The heat is intense, but it's necessary to remove impurities and make the gold shine. Your struggles are like that fire. They may feel overwhelming, but they're purifying you, shaping you into the person God created you to be. This process of preparation also teaches us something invaluable, the power of surrender. Too often, we try to control the outcome of our situations. We think, if I just work harder, try harder, or push through, everything will fall into place. But the truth is, our strength will never be enough. That's why God calls us to lay our burdens at His feet. Matthew 11 verse 28 says, "Come to me, all you who are weary and burdened, and I will give you rest." Surrendering doesn't mean giving up. It means acknowledging that God's strength is greater than ours and trusting Him to carry us through. Think about the story of Peter walking on water. As long as Peter kept his eyes on Jesus, he walked on the waves without sinking. But the moment he looked at the storm around him, fear took over and he began to sink. That's a powerful reminder for us. The storms in your life are real, but they don't have to consume you. Keep your eyes on Jesus and you'll find strength to keep moving forward. Now let's talk about the role of faith in this preparation process. Faith isn't just about believing in God's promises. It's about acting on them, even when the circumstances seem impossible. The Bible is filled with stories of people who acted in faith despite overwhelming odds. Take Noah, for example. God told him to build an ark in a time when rain was a foreign concept. Can you imagine the ridicule he must have faced? Yet Noah obeyed, and his faith not only saved his family, but also became a testimony of God's power and faithfulness. Or think about the walls of Jericho. God instructed the Israelites to march around the city for 7 days, blowing trumpets and shouting. From a human perspective, this plan made no sense, but their faith and obedience brought down the walls, paving the way for victory. These stories remind us that faith often requires us to step out of our comfort zones, to trust God's plan even when it doesn't make sense. And that's what God is calling you to do in your own life. Maybe you've been praying for a breakthrough, but it hasn't come yet. Maybe you're facing a battle that seems impossible to win. Whatever your situation, remember this: God is faithful. He hasn't brought you this far to leave you. As we continue, we'll dive deeper into how God's timing plays a critical role in your journey and how trusting that timing can transform your perspective and renew your strength. Let's now focus on one of the most challenging aspects of our journey: trusting God's timing. It's easy to believe in God's promises when everything is going smoothly, but when delays stretch on for weeks, months, or even years, doubt begins to creep in. Why does God make us wait? Why doesn't He answer our prayers immediately, especially when we're desperate for a breakthrough? These are questions we all wrestle with at some point, but here's what we need to understand: waiting is not wasted time. It's a divine strategy for preparation, growth, and alignment. Think about a seed planted in the ground. For weeks or months, there's no visible evidence of growth. But beneath the surface, the seed is transforming, taking root, and drawing strength from the soil. When the time is right, it breaks through the surface and begins to flourish. Your season of waiting is just like that. God is working beneath the surface of your life in ways you can't see. He's aligning opportunities, refining your character, and strengthening your faith. If He gave you the breakthrough too soon, you might not be ready to handle it. One of the most profound examples of waiting in the Bible is the story of Abraham and Sarah. God promised Abraham that he would become the father of many nations, but years passed without a child. At one point, they even tried to take matters into their own hands, leading to the birth of Ishmael. But Ishmael wasn't the fulfillment of God's promise. It wasn't until Abraham and Sarah were well beyond childbearing years that God gave them Isaac, the son of promise. Why the delay? Because God's timing wasn't just about fulfilling a promise, it was about showing His power and faithfulness. By waiting until it was humanly impossible, God ensured that no one could doubt His hand in the miracle. This story reminds us that God's delays are not denials. They're opportunities for Him to work in ways that exceed our understanding. When you're tempted to grow impatient, remember Isaiah 40 verse 31. Those who wait on the Lord shall renew their strength. They shall mount up with wings like eagles. They shall run and not be weary. They shall walk and not faint. But waiting isn't passive. It's not about sitting back and doing nothing. It's about active trust, praying, preparing, and staying faithful in the small things. Think of David again. During the years he waited to become king, he didn't waste his time. He tended sheep, honed his skills with a sling, and built a deep relationship with God. Those small, seemingly insignificant tasks prepared him for the giant he would one day face. They taught him humility, courage, and reliance on God. What small things is God calling you to be faithful in during your season of waiting? Now, let's talk about the role of persistence during these times. Persistence is a demonstration of faith. It's saying to God, I trust you enough to keep going, even when I don't see results yet. Consider the story of the persistent widow in Luke 18. She kept coming to the judge, asking for justice, until he finally granted her request. Jesus used this story to teach us the power of persistence in prayer. He said, Will not God bring about justice for His chosen ones who cry out to Him day and night? God hears your prayers, even when it feels like nothing is happening. Know that your cries are reaching His ears. Sometimes the answer is immediate, but often God uses the process of waiting to deepen our relationship with Him and strengthen our trust. Another powerful example of persistence is Elijah praying for rain. After 3 years of drought, Elijah prayed for rain and sent his servant to check the sky. 6 times the servant returned with the same report, no sign of rain. But Elijah didn't give up. He kept praying, and on the 7th time, the servant saw a small cloud on the horizon. That small cloud was the beginning of a downpour, reminder that even when we don't see immediate results, God is working. Your persistence in prayer, in faith, and in obedience will eventually bring the breakthrough you're waiting for. As we move forward, we'll explore how to hold on to faith when the storms of life feel overwhelming, and how God's promises can anchor us during even the toughest times. As we continue, let's delve into how faith becomes our anchor during the storms of life. Storms are inevitable. They come in many forms: unexpected loss, financial struggles, health challenges, or relational heartbreak. And in those moments, it's easy to feel adrift, like you're being tossed by waves with no control. But here's the good news. Faith is the anchor that holds us steady. It's not about ignoring the reality of the storm, but trusting that God is in control, even when the winds rage and the waves crash. Faith reminds us that storms don't last forever, and they often carry us to where we're meant to be. Let's look at another biblical example: Jesus calming the storm. The disciples were terrified as their boat was battered by the waves, and they cried out to Jesus, "Don't you care if we drown?" Isn't that a question we've all asked in the middle of our own storms? But Jesus responded not with fear, but with authority. He stood, rebuked the wind and the waves, and said, "Peace, be still." Instantly, the storm ceased, and there was calm. Then he turned to his disciples and asked, "Why are you so afraid? Do you still have no faith?" This story holds a powerful lesson. Even when it feels like Jesus is asleep during your storm, he's fully in control. He hasn't abandoned you. He's waiting for you to call out to him, not in fear, but in faith. Faith doesn't mean the absence of fear. It means choosing to trust God in the face of it. It means saying, "I don't understand why this is happening, but I know the one who holds my future." Let's connect this to your life. What storms are you facing right now? Maybe it's a financial crisis that seems impossible to overcome. Maybe it's a medical diagnosis that has shaken your world. Or maybe it's the quiet storm of loneliness, anxiety, or doubt. Whatever it is, take heart in this truth. God's promises are greater than your problems. Romans 8 verse 28 assures us, "All things work together for good for those who love God." Not some things, all things. That includes the storm you're in right now. But how do we practically hold on to faith when the storm feels unrelenting? It starts with remembering God's promises. Write them down, speak them aloud, and meditate on them daily. When fear tries to take over, combat it with the truth of God's word. One of the most powerful promises comes from Isaiah 41 verse 10. "Do not fear, for I am with you. Do not be dismayed, for I am your God. I will strengthen you and help you. I will uphold you with my righteous right hand." This promise is your anchor. It reminds you that you're not alone, that God's strength is greater than your weakness, and that his hand will hold you steady no matter how rough the seas become. Another key to holding on to faith is surrounding yourself with a community of believers. The journey of faith was never meant to be walked alone. When you're weak, let others stand in the gap for you. When your faith falters, lean on the faith of those around you. In the story of Moses, when he grew weary during the battle, Aaron and Hur came alongside him to hold up his arms. Their support ensured victory. Who are the Aaron and Hur in your life? Who can you lean on during this season? And just as importantly, whose arms can you help hold up? Faith also grows through reflection. Take time to remember how God has been faithful in the past. Think about the times when he carried you through challenges that once felt impossible. Let those memories remind you that the same God who was faithful then is faithful now and will be faithful in the future. Finally, faith requires action. It's not enough to believe in God's promises. You have to step out and act on them. Think of Peter stepping out of the boat to walk on water. As long as his eyes were on Jesus, he did the impossible. It wasn't until he focused on the storm that he began to sink. What step of faith is God calling you to take? Maybe it's forgiving someone who hurt you, applying for a job you feel unqualified for, or reaching out to someone in need. Whatever it is, take that step, even if it feels small. God honors even the smallest acts of faith. As we move to the final part of this video, we'll bring everything together and talk about how God's ultimate plan for your life will not only bring you through the storm, but lead you to a place of victory, purpose, and fulfillment. As we come to the final part of this journey, let's take a moment to step back and see the bigger picture. Every struggle, every storm, and every season of waiting has been leading you somewhere. God's plan for your life is not just about getting through the challenges. It's about stepping into the purpose He designed for you before the foundation of the world. Let's revisit Joseph's story one more time. After years of betrayal, slavery, and imprisonment, Joseph didn't just survive, he thrived. When he was finally elevated to a position of power, he wasn't bitter or resentful. Instead, he used his influence to save lives and bring reconciliation to his family. Joseph understood something profound. His trials were never just about him. They were part of a greater plan to bring hope and deliverance to others. Genesis 50 verse 20 sums it up perfectly. What the enemy meant for harm, God intended for good. The same is true for you. Your struggles are not meaningless. They're part of a divine plan to shape you, strengthen you, and position you to make an impact. The pain you've endured, the lessons you've learned, and the faith you've built are preparing you for something extraordinary. This is where we come full circle. Every story we've explored, from Joseph to the Israelites, from Abraham and Sarah to the woman with the issue of blood, points to one truth: God's promises never fail. Even when the journey is long, even when the storms rage, and even when the waiting seems endless, God is faithful. So, how do you step into the fullness of God's plan for your life? It starts with trust. Trust that God's timing is perfect, even when it feels late. Trust that the struggles you face are refining you, not defining you. And trust that the God who began a good work in you will bring it to completion. Isaiah 40 verse 31 gives us a beautiful promise. Those who wait on the Lord shall renew their strength. They shall mount up with wings like eagles. They shall run and not be weary. They shall walk and not faint. That's not just a poetic verse. It's a declaration of what happens when you place your hope in God. But here's the thing: God's plan for your life isn't just about you. Just like Joseph, just like David, and just like the Israelites, your journey is meant to inspire, encourage, and uplift others. Your testimony has the power to bring hope to someone who feels hopeless. Think about the people in your life who might be going through their own wilderness seasons. What would it mean for them to hear your story? To know that someone else has walked through the fire and come out stronger on the other side? This is your call to action. Share your story. Encourage others to hold on to faith, even when the road is rough. Be the light that reminds them that God's promises are true and His timing is perfect. And don't stop there. Surround yourself with a community of believers who can walk this journey with you. There's strength in unity, and when we come together in faith, we become an unstoppable force for God's kingdom. Finally, let's seal this message with a declaration of faith. Wherever you are right now, take a moment to speak this aloud. I trust that God is working all things together for my good. I believe that my struggles are not the end but the beginning of something greater. I am stepping into the promises of God, knowing that His timing is perfect and His plans for me are good. Amen. As we close, let me leave you with one more step to continue this journey. If today's message has spoken to your heart, don't stop here. Stay with us and unlock even more tools to empower your faith and transform your life. Watch our previous video, Unlock Hidden Powers, Synchronize Your Mind, and Fulfill Your True Destiny. It's packed with insights that will help you align with God's purpose and take your faith to the next level. And before you go, if you found this video meaningful, let us know. Hit the like button, share your thoughts and comments, and let us know how this message has impacted you. And if you know someone who could use encouragement today, share this video with them. It might be exactly what they need to hear. Finally, don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss out on more inspiring content like this. Together, let's continue to grow in faith, hope, and love. Thank you for being here today. Until next time, stay faithful, stay encouraged, and keep walking in the promises of God. See you soon.